G'day poker people, welcome back. After the first part of my $50 an hour playing 1-3 challenge, didn't go quite according to plan, at least in terms of results anyway. I definitely was in the mood to keep going back and grinding, trying to get these 50 hours in and these $50 an hour. So I went back at noon on a Saturday because Derby was running a $1,500 every 30 minutes high hand promotion. So hitting one of these high hands would definitely be beneficial towards getting that $50 an hour. So I was keen to put in some action. The promo ran 10 hours. The goal was to try and make it the full 10 hours. Let's see how we went with that. Let's not waste any more time and get to gambling. Let's go. And we're off to the races. We actually had to sit at a 1-2 game when we first arrived because there was a bit of a wait to get in the 1-3 mix. So I ended up playing 1-2 for 50 minutes and losing $41 for a pretty abysmal 1-2 win rate. Let's hop into the 1-3 streets to see if we can't rectify it and build up that 1-3 win rate. Let's go. Let's get to rectifying, kicking things off in the hijack with King Queen offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 10, and then I only get called by a passive cutoff. So it heads up to a flop of Queen Jack 7 rainbow. So let's go. We have top pair. My default strategy when I'm heads up out of position is just to check it over to the opponent and see what they do. I think because the opponent's a passive player, maybe just betting our really strong hands like top pair to try and build a pot is a better strategy. I stick to my default in this instance, maybe not the best play in the world, whatever the case, so I check it over to them and they do go ahead and bet. Fortunately, they make it 15 and I decide to throw in the call here. I think check raising will be a little bit thin. My opponent can definitely have two pairs and sets on this board, and even if they are bluffing with like an open-ended straight shot or a gut shot, we want to give them a bit of rope to continue barreling. So I throw in the call here and we're off to the turn, which is the 9 of diamonds. Not the best turn card in the world. King 10 now gets in a straight, plus I think my opponent probably has a bunch of Queen 9 and Jack 9 combinations as well. So I just check it over to them, see what they do. They go ahead and bet 30, and even though we do lose to a lot on this board, I think giving up here would just be a little bit too passive. Not entirely possible that my opponent is continuing to bet with Queen 10 or Jack 10. Plus, if they were bluffing on the flop with some type of a gut shot, that hand has likely picked up equity here, and I don't think they would necessarily slow down. So nothing to do but call in this instance. That's what I do, throw in the call, and we're still heads up to the river, which is the beautiful 10 of spades. Let's go. We make the straight and we suck out on any of their two pairs. Now, I think this is a really good spot to go ahead and lead against a passive opponent. Like I mentioned earlier, they have a bunch of two pairs on this board, even more on this river specifically. And because they're passive, I don't really expect them to fold any of those hands. So I think I should be leading something like 125 or 150 here. But I actually make a fairly significant blunder and I just check it over to the opponent, trying to play in flow. But yeah, I think this is just an autopilot move and actually kind of a punt. It's really called checking a punt, but I think checking here is an absolute punt. So I check it over to the opponent and not surprisingly, they do check back. I show my hand, fully expecting to win, and the opponent does show Queen 10. So there you go, they did have one of those two pair hands, and I just really don't think this opponent would have folded that even to an overbet lead on the river. So just very disappointed with my line on this one for sure. We're still looking to rectify mistakes in this next hand, the never-ending cycle that is No Limit Hold'em poker, and we've actually got a button straddle on for this hand, and it's the same villain from the previous hand that straddled the button here, and the action falls to my cutoff with King 4 of hearts. I raise it up to 25, and then the button calls. So it heads up to a flop, and it's a banger, Ace King King rainbow, let's go. Much like I said in the previous hand, I think deviating from my default play and just betting my really strong hands against a passive opponent probably is a higher EV play, but I'm still playing default here, which I definitely think is a mistake. Whatever the case, I do check it over to them, and then they check back pretty quick. So not really what we wanted to happen on the flop, and the turn is the 7 of hearts. Now I think we absolutely just have to start trying to get a bit of value with our hand. So I make it 25, and then the button calls, and I'm actually pretty happy when the button calls here because I don't think it's totally impossible that the villain did check an ace-x combination on the flop, particularly if they have a weak kicker, which is another reason again why I think just going ahead and c-betting on this board would be a really good idea, but there's going to have so many offsuit ace-x combinations which they're defending on the button straddle that I'm actually liking this scenario a little bit. And the river is the Jack of clubs. Now I think we have to go ahead and put in a really big value bet, just trying to get paid by my opponent when they did check back an ace-x hand on the flop. I decided to make it 80 here. I think I should probably go a bit bigger. I really don't think a passive opponent's going to fold an ace-x combination to like a 120 bet, so maybe missing a little bit of value with a smaller size bet here. Whatever the case, I make it 80, and then the button calls pretty quickly. I show my hand, and then the villain goes to flip his hand up, but then I think he realizes I have a king, and he goes to muck his hand, but I could see that he did have a7 offsuit, so yeah, probably missing a bit of value by just not triple barreling this hand or overbetting bigger on the river. So yeah, just not playing super aggressive today, just showing a bit of passive bias so far. I'm not in love with it. The beautiful thing about poker is that there's always going to be another hand to try and redeem yourself and play the hand well. So that's the goal in this next hand. A tight aggressive cutoff opens it to 10, passive small blind calls, and I'm in the big blind with king 3 of diamonds, and I decide to throw in the call. So we're 3 ways to a flop of jack 7-7 with 2 hearts. Small blind checks it over to me. I check it over the pre-flop aggressor in flow, who checks back. So we get a free turn, which is the queen of diamonds. When the small blind checks it over to me, I think this is a really good spot to start bluffing. I think when both the cutoff check on the flop and the small blind checks on the turn, the chances that either of them have a really strong hand like a 7x or even a strong jack is pretty unlikely. So we're going to have more of those hands in our range here. So I think it's a good spot to try and bluff and try to represent those hands. So I go ahead and make it 20, and then the cutoff calls and the small blind folds. Now I think when the cutoff calls here, they're going to have a lot of queen x hands in their range, probably ace queen, king queen, queen 10 pure. So we are against a pretty strong hand here. So we definitely need to keep that in mind when we go to a river, and the river is the 4 of hearts. Now, even though I do give the cutoff credit for having a pretty strong range on this board that includes a lot of top pairs, this is going to be an absolutely scary AF river for them when the front door flush gets in, when they know I could have more 7x combinations in my range than they could. So I actually think, in spite of them most likely having a top pair, we can probably still bluff them off of it. We just need to go really big with a bet here. I decide to go for it. I go ahead and bet 130, and then the cutoff is in the tank, probably a good 15 seconds before folding. So let's go. The extended tank, I think maybe my read was right and they had a queen and we blasted them off of it. You love to see that. Definitely starting to kick that passive bias. Let's go. Let's see if we can keep this momentum rolling and continue playing well in this next hand. I'm in the cutoff with king 9 offsuit. I make it 10, and the action folds to a tight aggressive big blind who 3-bets it to 40. Now, we'll say when the big blind 3-bets closing the action, I think it's almost always going to be a pretty linear range when you are playing 1-3 and honestly 2-5 as well, just because they have the option to just flat with their more middling strength hands. So I think they're just going to go ahead and 3-bet their strongest hands. So with that in mind, even though we do have position and we are getting a fairly good price at this stack depth, I think we should just be making a disciplined fold pre-flop with king 9 offsuit specifically, which is just going to be dominated by all of the opponents' ace king and king queen combinations. I decide to throw in the call here. We are getting a good price in position, really deep stacks, but yeah, I think it's just a little bit undisciplined and I should be folding. Whatever the case though, we do have post flop to play, and the flop is ace king 6 with 2 diamonds. The opponent c-bets for 30, and I decide to throw in the call here in position. So we get to see a turn, which is the 8 of diamonds, putting in the front door flush, and then the villain checks it over to me, and even though they are checking it, I'm still not feeling great about my hand. I think pretty much all of my opponent's ace-x combinations, except for like ace-king, are going to shut down on this turn and check it over to me to induce action. So I really don't expect them to bet any of those hands, so I don't think we're getting a bunch of folds. So I just check it and hoping to get to showdown for really cheap at this point, in all honesty. So we get to see a river, which is the ace of spades, a fairly good river because it makes it less likely my opponent does have an ace-x combination, but in spite of that, they do continue betting at it. They go ahead and make it 60, and yet again, we are getting a good price, but I really think, in spite of this river, like, being good for my hand, I still don't know if we're good here. My opponent still has a bunch of ace-queen, ace-jack, and ace-10 offsuit combinations in their range. Plus, if they were going for like thin value with king-queen, I wouldn't be totally shocked either. Not totally impossible that they checked a 2-pair or set on the turn when the flush draw gets in to induce a bet either. So I do think my opponent just has too many strong hands here. And this is why I should have folded this hand pre-flop, because even on a good run out, we're still not confident that we're good. So I just decide to fold my hand, and then the villain was actually kind enough to show ours king queen offsuit. So there you go, we made a good read on the river, even if we did fuck up earlier in the hand. Next hand up, the low jack was coming in for the straddle in the low jack obviously. Anyway, we've got a low jack straddle on and the action folds to my big blind with 7-5 of spades. I raise up to 25, probably a little bit too loose with 3 villains still left to act. Whatever the case though, I make it 25 and then the tight aggressive low jack calls. So we're heads up to a flop of a jack 8-4 rainbow with 1 spade. I stick to my default here, I check it over to the villain out of position and then they check back. So we get a free term, which is the 3 of hearts, giving us a gut shot straight draw. When my opponent checks back on the flop, I think the chances they have a super nutted hand is pretty unlikely. It's a good spot to go ahead and bluff, particularly when we pick up equity. I go ahead and make it 30, and then the low jack calls. Not quite what we wanted to see, but we do have some outs to improve on the river, and the river is the 10 of clubs, so we do not improve on this river. But having said that, I actually think we can still continue to bluff here. Like I said on the flop, I think if my opponent had a strong hand like a Jack X, they probably would just bet it themselves. When they call on the turn, I think they're going to have a lot of weaker pairs like 8X through any 3X combination here. And this is just one of those spots where if I did check it on the river and then the villain just checked backs like Ace-3 or pocket 6s, I would just hate myself because obviously we could have bluffed them off of one of those hands. So I decided to go for it in this spot. I go ahead and bet 120 and then the low jack folds. Let's go. You love to see it. Taken down another pot with another bluff. Let's go. Next up, we have a 10-9 of spades in the cutoff. I raise it to 10 and then I get called by both the blinds. So we are 3 ways to a flop of a 10-9-9 rainbow. Definitely seen worse flops in my life. When the blinds check it over to me, I'm obviously going to try and get some value with this hand. I make it 15 and then only the tight aggressive small blind calls. So we're off to a turn, which is the king of spades completing the 4-card rainbow. The villain checks it over to me. Now I think we have a really interesting sizing decision. Part of me just wants to absolutely go ahead and bet like 75 on this turn. If my opponent has a king X hand or a straight or a 9, they're not going to fold to that size of a bet, obviously. So maybe we should just be trying to print to get this hand against that hand, but I do think there's some merit to down betting to try and induce raises from my opponent. If my opponent has queen jack or a 9x combination, they're going to go ahead and check raise if I use a really small bet size, so maybe we can inflate the pot even bigger by doing that. Really could go either way. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. I decided to down bet in this instance and make it 20, and then the villain throws in the call. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 9 of diamonds, so we actually river quads. Let's freaking go. The villain checks it over to me, and now I think we absolutely have to go ahead and bomb this hand. I think it's pretty unlikely my opponent does have queen jack when they only flat on the turn. I think it's much more likely they have a king X combination. They don't have a 9 anymore, but I just don't think a 10x combination, which we block anyway, will call a large bet, but I think a king X will, and they do have a few king X's because king queen and king jack were a gut shot on the flop, so I don't think they're going to fold those to a single C bet there, so I think we should absolutely go ahead and bomb it here to try and get paid off by a king. So I go ahead and bet 175, and then the opponent is in the tank 30 seconds. I'm starting to freak out a little bit, like, oh, maybe I got a little bit too greedy and sized up too much. But eventually the small blind does throw in the call. We love to see it. We end up showing our quads, and then the small blind flashes the king of clubs before mucking. So we do call their heart out on this river, and we probably get max value with the tank call. I think that's indicative of maybe if we went even a little bit bigger, they would have folded. So very happy to see that. Even with the high hand promotion running, unfortunately, we don't qualify for it because you need both cards for quads to play to get the high hand, but I'm definitely not going to complain because we made max value with the hand during the hand anyway. Let's go. Let's keep this momentum rolling. Next hand, I'm on the button with Ace-3 offsuit. I make it 10, a passive small blind calls, and then a tight aggressive big blind 3 bets at 230. It's kind of similar to the King-9 offsuit hand where my opponent uses a small 3 bet size and I have ultimate position. I'm going to be pretty tempted to call with anything, and I think calling with Ace-3 offsuit is a better hand to do it with than King-9 offsuit, just because we can make a wheel straight with this hand at sometimes at least. So I throw in the call and then the small blind calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop, and it's another banger. 3-3 deuce with 2 clubs. Let's go. We are flopping monsters today. The small blind checks it over to the big blind, who C bets for 40. Now the action's on me, and I think we have a pretty clear raise in this spot. If the big blind has an overpair, I don't think there's any world where they're folding on this flop, and we just want to pile in money to try and stack those hands as quickly as possible. And if my opponent does have a hand like Ace King, I really think a tight aggressive player is going to shut down with that on the turn if they don't improve. So there's just not more value to get from that hand anyway. In game, I decide to call. I think this is a ridiculous play, really, really bad, way too passive. I've been showing a passive bias in a few of the hands, and I think this is another spot where I'm just like not playing my strong hands aggressive enough. And yeah, I really hate this play. I think I should definitely be raising to try and stack over pairs. Whatever the case, I do throw in the call, and the small blind gets out of the way. And then the turn is the 6 of diamonds, and then the small blind is in the tank for 4 years before betting 50 with like a very timid demeanor. And now I think when my opponent tanks forever and then acts really timid, I think they do have an overpair. I think they still have a bunch of overpairs in their range, but I actually think they're kind of scared by this turn card because the obvious 5-4 straight draw got in. And with that read in mind, I think if we raise here, they're just going to go ahead and fold their overpairs, which we don't want. So I think we just have to continue with the call when I do have that read. So I throw in the call. Of course, this makes me even more regretful for not raising on the flop. Whatever the case, though, I throw in the call, and then the river is the 4 of clubs. Not surprisingly, the small blind checks it over to me. And now with my read that the opponent has an overpair and they're really scared by this run out, I think we just have to use a small bet size. I think going all in would absolutely probably get a range fold, which actually makes this a really good spot to bluff. But we don't have a bluff here. We have the nut trips. So I decide to go ahead and bet 100, and then the small blind says shit. So yep, they didn't like this run out, but they eventually do call. Fortunately, I end up showing my trips, and then the opponent puts their hand in the muck. I really do think we would have stacked them if we raised on the flop, and yeah, just playing too passive and costing me money. It's gonna hurt this win rate in the long run, in all honesty. Next hand, we've got a double board bomb pot. Let's go. I love these bloody things, except for I'm in the small blind for this hand with 9-4 offsuit. So not the best scenario to kick off a bomb pot, but any hand is live in a bomb pot, like they say. So we are 8 different ways to 2 different flops. The first one is Queen 9-4 with 2 spades. So hey, we make 2 pair on that one. The second flop is Jack 8-6. Rainbow. So the action starts off on me, and I do have a pretty strong hand on one of the boards here, but just being out of position to 7 different players, I think I'm just going to check everything in my range in this spot, see what develops. So I check it, and then everyone else checks, so we get 2 free turns. The first one is the 6 of clubs, putting out backdoor clubs, and the second one is the 2 of clubs, pretty brick on that turn. So the action starts off for me this time, and now I decide I just want to go ahead and bet at it. I should fold my opponents off of chops. It's a bit dicey, it's betting into 7 different people, but when they all show weakness on the flop, I think it's probably a good spot to just try and take it down, or at least narrow the field a bit. So I bet 50, and then I get called by a passive low jack and a passive button. So not quite ideal. Definitely don't want to be in the pot still with 3 people, but whatever the case, we are. And the first river is the 8 of spades, putting in the front door spades, and the second river is the 8 of clubs. Now I think it's really interesting with what we want to do here. I am very worried about the spades getting in on the first flop. I think it's very likely that either of the opponents could have the nut flushes in their range, but if they don't, I'm wondering if we can bluff them off of a chop. It's very unlikely that someone does have an 8x on the second board because there's literally 1 8 left in the deck. So we're never going to get that hand to fold, but it just makes it less likely that the opponents have completely nutted hands in their range. So maybe it's good to bluff at it for that reason. And every other hand, like, we're pretty much chopping with that's not the nut flush. So maybe we will get a lot of folds with a bet here. Let me know what you would do in the comments below, but we are definitely trying to fight the passive bias we've been showing this session. Because I decide to bluff at it, I go ahead and bet 225, and then the low jack folds and the big blind folds. Let's go. We somehow bluff into 2 different people on a double board bomb pot, and it works out because we end up scooping this pot with only 9 high on the second board. Let's go. This next hand, we've got another one. Another double board bomb pot. Let's go. This time I have much better position because I'm in the cutoff with ace-9 of spades. Much better position, much better hand. Let's see if we can hit the flops. The first one is ace-10-8 rainbow with 1 spade. And the second flop is 9-9 deuce rainbow. So let's go. We have a strong hand on both boards. Holy shit, that's a lot of fun in double board bomb pots. And the action actually checks round to me. Definitely want to go ahead and bet this hand for sure. I go ahead and make it 40, and then I only get called by a tight aggressive under the gun player. So it heads up to a turn, which is the Queen of clubs on the first board and the 10 of spades on the second board. If our trips wasn't strong enough, we have a nut flush draw to go along with it. When the under the gun player checks it over to me, definitely want to continue betting at this pot, essentially for value. Unless my opponent has a full house on the second board, we actually scoop any 9x combination with our top pair on the first board. So really good spot to put in a bet to try and get value. I make it 75, which I'm pretty happy with this sizing. We don't want to overbet or anything because that'll probably blast them off for the pot if of all the hands we do scoop, and we're probably only getting called by chops at that point. But yeah, don't want to go too small either just because I don't think my opponent is going to fold trips on the second board and we scoop most of those hands. So I think I've been critical of some of my decisions in this session so far, but I think this one is chef's kiss, the absolute right bet sizing. So I make it 75, and then the under the gun player throws in the call. So we're very happy to see that. The first river is the 5 of spades, and the second one is the king of clubs. Under the gun checks it over to me again, much like it was on the turn. I want to bet a size here that will get some scoops to call. Really don't think my opponent is going to fold a 9x combination, but in case they are liable to, I don't think we should overbet or anything. I think we should give them a good price to call so we can scoop some of those hands. So I decide to bet 200 here, and then the under the gun player folds. But overall, very happy with my bet sizings in this hand at least. And this was the last interesting hand we played in the session, and I do think we closed it out with some good play towards the end of the session there. So there you have it, the most interesting hands I played across the 1-3 session. Ended up playing a total of 8 hours and 20 minutes of the 1-3. So when you factor in the 50 minutes of me playing 1-2 and then just some breaks I had in between, I did end up playing the full 10 hours of the promotion. So very happy with that for sure. In terms of my decisions during hands, I would say overall I am happy, but there definitely showed a bit of a passive bias, particularly when I had some strong hands and just missed a lot of value, most notably with trips, with both the king trips and the 3 trips. So yeah, just playing some of my strong hands a bit too passive and probably losing opportunity cost or not just winning bigger pots with those hands for sure. But definitely mixed in lots of good bluffs in spots where I thought my opponent were weak and made full value with some of my strong hands like the quads. So overall, I'm going to go with an A grade. I do like a lot of the decisions I made, but it's definitely on the lower spectrum of A grade. And for my efforts, I did have good results on the session, which is always fun. And we actually go into the green for the $50 an hour 1-3 challenge. Still a long way from actually making $50 an hour at 1-3, but at least we're trending in the right direction after this session. And obviously there's a bunch more sessions to come, so make sure you hit subscribe and follow this journey, see if we can get to that $50 an hour. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.